Sponsored by Incogni. Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome to Lost in Adaptation. As the name implies, this is a show about film adaptations of books regarding how well they converted the plot and themes from page to screen. Today we're having a gander at The Beach, a movie released in the year 2000 directed by Danny Boyle and starring Leonardo Dicaprio, that was based on a 1996 novel by English writer Alex Garland. The best way I can describe The Beach is it's a cross between American Pie 2 and The Lord of the Flies. It's the story of a backpacker who discovers and joins a tiny secret society living on a hidden beach on an island off the coast of Taiwan and has an amazing time there until the first serious thing goes wrong and the entire population goes slowly mad with either desperation or power until they are literally killing each other by the end. It's one of two reasonably successful books by Garland. After seeing his novel work its way through the filmmaking process, he ended up joining the industry himself and went on to write the screenplays for 28 Days Later, Sunshine, and the criminally underappreciated masterpiece Dread, before adding directing to his achievements in 2014 with the critically acclaimed Ex Machina. Amusingly, he then experienced the novel adaptation process from the other side when he directed Annihilation, a film based on a book by Jeff Vandermeer. Said amusement comes from the fact that his own experience clearly didn't incline him to be especially bothered about sticking to Vandermeer's plot, but that's an episode for another day. The Beach did amazingly well considering it had zero marketing. Simply from word of mouth, it sold almost 700,000 copies and has been translated into 25 different languages. I thought it was pretty good on the whole, but I did struggle a little bit at times because of my personal subjective dislike of books with intentionally unlikable leads. Another thing of note is the chapters are all ridiculously short, some lasting barely a page, and they're all titled with a little hint for what's about to happen, so you're occasionally hit with little moments of dread when it's something especially ominous sounding. The book's success caught the eye of 20th Century Fox, who greenlit a film adaptation to be directed by Danny Boyle, an up-and-coming British director hot off an unexpected hit called Trainspotting. Boyle's subsequent extensive directing resume overlaps with Garland's writing credits a ton of times, so I guess The Beach was the start of a beautiful friendship. He's also the guy behind Slumdog Millionaire and that movie where the Beatles disappeared. As mentioned, DiCaprio starred with a large supporting cast that included Tilda Swinton, Robert Carlyle, and Patterson Joseph in the relatively easy to pronounce category, and Guillaume Canet, Virginie Nadoye, and Lars Aron Hansen in the I am sorry I am so bad at pronouncing anything even vaguely foreign group. The latter don't seem to have extensive credits in the US, but are quite big in their respective home countries. Surprisingly, a large part of the film was actually shot on location on an actual Taiwanese beach, which is an extra mile most filmmakers wouldn't have gone to with more easily accessible locations available. The film turned a profit at the box office, but wasn't loved by critics then and still isn't now. Weirdly, I remember seeing it when it was relatively new and I thought it was pretty good, but I was like 13 years old, so what the fuck did I know? Okay, we are on the verge of talking adaptation, but first a quick word about this video's sponsor. The sad and frustrating truth of the internet today is every third website we visit is in the business of collecting our personal data to be bought and sold and passed around like our private info is a commodity in a medieval marketplace. This information is at best being used to target you for micro-marketing. Worse still, these companies are susceptible to being hacked themselves, then the gods only know who will have your home address and phone number after that. Now, you do have the right to have this information deleted, so with sufficient time and the right legal jargon, you could potentially contact every one of the hundreds of known data trading companies that might have your information, or you can do what I've done by going to incogni.com/Dominic Noble and allow Incogni to do this heavy lifting for you. After I granted them the power to demand its deletion on my behalf, they've been able to identify 115 potential companies who might be holding my information. Incogni will not access this info, they don't keep it for themselves, they just destroy it so it can't be used for evil. It's like the Ring of Power, you just gotta throw that bitch in the fires of Mount Doom. It's just been really nice being able to sign up for things like newsletters without immediately receiving a ton of unrelated spam, you know? The first 100 people who follow the link below and use the code Dominic Noble will get 20% off Incogni. That's incogni.com/Dominic Noble and use the code Dominic Noble to decommodify yourself and take your personal data off the market. Righty-ho, let's kick this off with a synopsis of the elements of the movie that are loyal to the source material. A 20-something backpacker by the name of Richard comes to Thailand in search of some idyllic place in the world that hasn't already been overrun with tourism. He ends up in a hostel next to an attractive French couple and a rather volatile Scottish gentleman going by the name of Daffy Duck, who talked to him very briefly before suiciding, leaving Richard a handmade map to an island in a national preserve containing one of the last perfect, untouched by civilization beaches in the world. Teaming up with his new French friends named Françoise and Etienne, they head towards their new goal, first through normal touristy means, then swimming the last stretch of the journey. Along the way, Richard kinda falls hard for Françoise, but doesn't want to get between her and her boyfriend, and bonds with some American holidayers, leaving them a copy of his map in an impulsive moment. They make it to the island and almost immediately find themselves in a field of marijuana, and narrowly escape being found and gunned down by the local drug farmers. Making their way to the other side of the landmass, they discover their goal is completely blocked off by sheer cliffs on every side, but overcome this by leaping down a waterfall. Finally, at their quest's end, they find a surprisingly well-built village on the edge of the most perfect beach that has ever existed, and a commune of like-minded travelers who have been filtering into this secret location for a few years. Their sort of leader Sal decides to allow them to join, and they have a great time assimilating into the hippie culture there, bonding with everyone except Sal's boyfriend Bugs, who's a bit of a dickhead. Richard makes himself something of a camp hero by slaying a baby shark doot-doot-dee-doot-dee-doo and saving them all from what might have been a very hungry few days while rainfall impeded spearfishing. At this point in the film, the plot starts to diverge a lot more from the book, but some elements still held true. When the group's supply of rice gets ruined, Richard takes part in a trip to the mainland to stock up and is horrified to find out that the Americans he mapped up are embarking on a quest of their own to find them, which is bad because in order to avoid getting overrun, the one rule of beach life is you don't talk about beach life. Richard's mental health starts taking a bit of a tailspin around this point as he starts having continuous dreams and hallucinations about the late Daffy and feeling disassociated with reality. Completely unrelated to this, things get infinitely worse when three members of the camp, Swedish brothers with a knack for fishing, are attacked by a mommy shark doot-doot-dee-doot-dee-doo and are all either killed or badly wounded, which is a big problem because the secrecy-obsessed Sal would rather let them die than allow anyone to bring the medical help to the island they would need to survive. The Americans eventually make their way to the island via a raft, but aren't as lucky with the dope farmers, running right into them and getting shot dead. The armed guards then invade the little village to assert their dominance, which drives Sal into even more murderous desperation to keep her little beach resort going, which is the cue for the saner members of the commune to decide it's maybe time to head home. Okay, let's talk about some dispersed details first, then I'll cover how the plots differed after the halfway mark. Richard joins the ever-increasing list of characters who were originally British in the novels but American in the film, and apparently this particular example caused more than the usual drama of just mildly annoying me. The exact details aren't publicly known, but Danny Boyle's close personal friend Ewan McGregor, who would presumably have been busting out his Obi-Wan Kenobi accent again, was originally cast in the role but was forced out in favor of Dicaprio. The prevailing theory is Boyle was offered increased funding by Fox as a bribe to cast an American lead with slightly more name recognition and chose not to stand by his friend, mismanaging the whole awkward affair so badly he and McGregor stopped speaking for years. Thankfully, they eventually buried the hatchet, which I assume is why Trainspotting 2 was a thing. Even though the conversation between Daffy and Richard may have seemed pretty short to begin with, it is significantly longer than the 4 or 5 sentences they exchanged in the book. I believe it was an intentional plot point that Daffy somehow sensed a like-minded person in Rich from basically no interaction whatsoever. The camp's cook was affectionately nicknamed Unhygienics, which Leo passes off in the narration as being due to his never-ending obsession with cleaning the smell of fish off his hands, but was actually a reference to the French comic book series Asterix, which are huge in the UK, but I guess not widespread enough in the US for the filmmakers to be confident their audience would recognize it. Kitty, the black Englishman, was a bit of a socially awkward recluse in the book, but clearly confident enough to attempt the Herculean task of teaching the king's sport to the ignorant Americans surrounding him in the film. Actually, to be fair, cricket is fucking stupid. The film added a tradition for welcoming newcomers to the beach that involves crude tattoos and sending up sky lanterns with their names on them, which is a little weird when you think about it because they're supposedly not supposed to have any newcomers and they're literally sending up signals to the authorities that they're illegally occupying a nature preserve. They also added the Frenchies pulling a prank on Richard halfway through their long swim, involving pretending to be a shark, which seems in a little poor taste considering they're already at a pretty high risk of drowning in this situation. The film dialed up the love triangle between Richard, Françoise, and Etienne to the extreme. In the book, Richard's feelings for Françoise never end up going further than some light flirting and a suspiciously long kiss on the cheek. The film versions of them eventually give in to their passion and make like that teaspoon song, and Etienne angrily but maturely decides not to get in the way of her happiness and steps aside. The ill-fated Americans that Richard bonds with in the book pretend at first to be mindless surfer bro types, but eventually admit that they're actually intellectual Harvard graduates playing up to European expectations of American stereotypes for their own amusement. In the film, they legit just are surfer bro stereotypes, which is kind of funny when you think about it. Richard's descent into madness is a lot more subtle in the book. It starts with graphic dreams about Daffy bearing the wounds of his death, shooting the shit with him, and then progresses to him seeing him during the day and having complex discussions with him. The film maintains this, but also includes him taking a super fast nosedive into Hallucination Town when he's forced out of the camp and starts seeing the world around him as Banjo-Kazooie on the N64. There's also a tiny suggestion in the book that his connection to Daffy's ghost may be more than just madness, as information about the history of the beach his late friend shares with him turns out to align suspiciously well with what actually happened. It's open-ended if this is just good deductive guesswork from Richard's subconscious or an actual spiritual element to the story. As my very helpful Patreon poll shows that very few people are familiar with either version of this story, I think the best way to describe the parting of the ways in plots is to synopsisize both and let you judge for yourself. A key factor is the omission of a character called Jed. He was a bit of an outsider amongst the community because he is one of the very few people who found his way to the beach without an invite from an existing member, and he spent most of his time doing solo missions away from the camp that no one else knew much about. When someone needed to go on a rice run, Richard and Jed volunteered, and he found out he's actually not all that weird, he just wasn't being given a chance. When Jed learns that Richard distributed a copy of the map, he agrees to keep his secret. Later, Sal reassigns Richard to work with Jeb at his request because it turns out his job is to patrol the island and keep an eye out for interlopers, and he'd seen the American party over the water building a raft, so wanted to team up with Richard to give him a chance to do some damage control. After the shark kills one of the Swedes, mortally wounds another, and shocks the third into a catatonic state, Jeb is the only guy with enough first aid training to play doctor, so Richard has to keep an eye on their new friend's approach alone. When they eventually make the journey across the water, Richard is so desperate to avoid the consequences for bringing them there, he allows them to blunder right into the drug field and they're dragged off and executed by the farmers. Slightly unhinged by this, he comes back to the beach and takes it out on the catatonic Swede brother, trying to beat him back into sanity, which surprisingly kind of works but results in the poor guy tearing off into the jungle. Sal, having apparently gone mad with power after years of dominion over this tiny nation, orders Richard to go and find him and kill him so he can't make it back to the mainland and spill any secrets. Richie is saved from having to choose whether to follow through on this or not by his prey stealing the camp's only boat and escaping. Etienne then approaches him and starts nervously trying to reassure him that he doesn't mind that Richard kissed his girlfriend and he has no plans to cause any trouble, which confuses Richard at first until he figures out that the campers got wind of his wet mission and now thinks that he's the captain of Sal's personal Gestapo. Realizing how thoroughly messed up things have become on their little Eden, Richard teams up with Etienne, Françoise, Jeb, and his other close friend Keely to escape on the Americans' raft, but before they can enact their plan, the drug farmers turn up to issue a warning about not giving out any more maps, which involves pistol whipping key members of the group and hanging the dead bodies of the recently murdered Americans from the rafters of the camp's longhouse. The utter shock of this sends the entire camp into a state of animalistic frenzy, which for some reason leads to them violently dismembering the bodies in order to get them down. Unfortunately, the farmers also leave behind the map, which Richard had signed in a not very bright moment, so the mob turns on him and tries to subject him to the death of 1,000 cuts with machetes and kitchen knives. His friends come to his rescue with fishing spears and mortally wound Bugs and probably Sal before hightailing it out of there and escaping back to civilization, where they live out the rest of their lives with a ton of psychological and physical scars. In the Jebless film, Sal goes on the rice run and volunteers Richard to go with her somewhat against his will. When she's confronted with proof of his poor map-related decision-making, she uses this info to extort sex from him. Later, when Sharky and George bust up the triplets, the entire camp proves it's fallen rather further from compassionate society than any of them had realized, as they decide the survivor's slow death is too much of a bummer to deal with while they're supposed to be living in paradise, and drag him off into the jungle to die out of earshot. Only Etienne retains enough humanity to stay and try to help him. When the Americans turn up, Sal punishes Richard by decreeing he's banished from the camp until he can find a way to stop them from making it to the beach, causing him to disassociate completely due to the isolation and stress, believing that he's slipped into a world of video game logic and Vietnam movies. This mental lapse leads to him setting up deadly traps for the approaching tourists, but before they can be put to use, they stumble upon the dope farmers who panic and shoot them. Witnessing their horrible deaths snaps Richard out of his fantasy world, and he returns to the camp to convince at least Françoise to leave with him. Before they can go, the farmers overrun them and serve eviction papers. When it looks like Sal is going to rally her people into resistance, the boss offers her a choice: to leave or to shoot blabbermouth Richard in cold blood to prove that she's committed to keeping the beach a secret. Richard tries to convince her that this execution will be too much even for her budding cult to accept, but so desperate is she to keep the dream going, she pulls the trigger, only to discover that the gun isn't loaded, as the whole thing was a ploy from the drug lord to expose the true depths of her insanity to her people. His plan works and everyone is brought back to their senses, abandoning Sal and returning to the mainland and their previous lives. In the original cut, Sal's fate is left unknown, though a deleted scene shows her using the now apparently loaded gun on herself after being left behind. Final thoughts. The way I see it, while the film did seek its own path at times, the main themes of attempting to find an unspoiled Eden in this crowded, over-commercialized planet of ours, the loss of humanity that comes with obsessively, jealously guarding something for yourself and only yourself, the corrupting nature of power, and descents into madness are all still pretty prominent. I quite liked how the film played with the audience's expectations of the local Taiwanese marijuana farmers, and the twist reveal that, despite the hard lives that they led and the violence they used to protect themselves, by the end of the movie they had actually retained more humanity than the smug white hippies who lived next door. I believe intentionally both versions of the story drive home the hypocrisy of people like Sal and Richard, who judge other people for spoiling the virgin territories of the world, while apparently believing the same did not apply to them. That they could take over a perfect wonder of nature, cut down its trees and dig its grounds without spoiling it, as if they were the one group of privileged interlopers who didn't count. Also, not very fun fact, an additional level of irony to this theme came to light when Taiwanese environmentalists filed lawsuits against 20th Century Fox for causing permanent damage to the local ecosystem. Yeah, it turns out the beach they filmed on wasn't quite perfect enough for these studios, so they bulldozed a large section of it to make it look more naturally idyllic. The final icing on the irony cake is the film's release caused such an increase in tourism, the government had to close the beach to the general public, so it really is a forbidden place now. Despite my personal soft spot for it, it seems the beach does not really hold much of a legacy besides having destroyed a beach and a friendship. It lives on as proof that even if you don't screw up an adaptation of a popular book, the end result can still be pretty meh. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. Please allow me to leave you with the usual reminder that likes, comments, and shares on social media are the only things that make the difference between a healthy YouTube channel and a dead one, and if you crave some extra DOM content, there are a few episodes of Lost in Adaptation that are now exclusively available on my Patreon page. Take care of yourselves.
When the ennui seeps into your brain and you're mad enough, you start spotting trains. Take the map off that daffy guy. On the other side, you'll find paradise. Down the waterfall, there's a secret place where you can punch baby sharks right in the face. Wreck a hole. fucking die.
Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, Shelby Holtz, Attell Spurdloff, and Trace Carter. Shout out to Ilnej for the credits music, check out his channel for more parody and original songs, and a huge thank you to this video's editor, Sophia Riccardi. Links to her work in the video description. Sorry. Say hello to the beautiful watchers, buddy. Mandatory cameo for the bloopers. Called Jeb. Ow, my jaw clicked. To issue a Don't ad lib, Dom. Yay, I did it.